Thank you for joining, and please welcome Lisa from High Hopes Clubhouse in Waterville.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Soucie, and I'm the director of High Hopes Clubhouse here in Waterville, Maine. We're so happy and a little nervous to be with you today for this edition of the WANA webinar series. Today's topic is keeping it Clubhouse, new member orientation, and staff hiring during COVID. When COVID hit and closed down our clubhouses, we all kind of scrambled around. We knew how to support our existing membership and staff. But what about those members we didn't have strong relationships with that were in the referral process or new staff coming on board? Today, High Hopes Clubhouse and Capital Clubhouse, who are sister clubhouses here in Maine, will jointly present their approach to enrolling and orientating new members during the times of this virtual and hybrid clubhouse operation. We have Kaelee and James with us from High Hopes Clubhouse here in Waterville, and we have Chris Corey with us from Capital Clubhouse. After their presentation, we'll be hearing from Genesis Club in Massachusetts about the challenges and the opportunities that they experienced involving hiring and onboarding new staff in these days of COVID. So go ahead, Kaelee. James.
Hi, I'm Kaelee. I work in the Membership Services Unit at High Hopes Clubhouse. And this is...
Hi, I'm James. I'm a member of the High Hopes Clubhouse, and I help do a few virtual tours.
And with us presenting is Chris from Capital Clubhouse.
Good morning.
For our presentation, we're going to be presenting about virtual orientation and how that's all approached. Obviously, with the clubhouses closed, we had to ultimately figure out a solution to how to enroll new members during this time. Next slide. So we all went through this globally. The clubhouses are closed, and all we're thinking about is, first, how do we keep our existing members supported and feeling connected to each other? And how do we keep enrolling members and keep growing our community during this time?
So our problems, how do people who want to join clubhouses but are closed, how do we get new members? How do we engage new members? How do we reach out to people who wish to become new members? And how do we keep our current members engaged?
Next slide. So to do this, we ultimately had to embrace Zoom, which is what we used, and online solutions. So in doing this, we didn't realize that this tool is very helpful, and it's something that we actually will probably end up using afterwards. So we found out that it was a really good initial introduction for our existing members and potential members. We found that they found that it was helpful to get information before actually coming to the clubhouse, and it gave them more time to form questions.
This was also helpful because at times it allowed for them to get started immediately, and due to them not having to worry about childcare, transportation, and in general less scheduling conflicts.
It also can expand Clubhouse service mediums and reach a greater population of active members, in addition to reaching out to prospective new members.
It also has been reported by new members that went through the virtual orientation that it helped lessen the anxiety when they came to the clubhouse.
Absolutely. Next slide. So we found that before the pandemic, we were having members come to our clubhouse who were choosing to come out of isolation and join our community. Now, in this current environment, everyone is isolating, and they need to know that there is a community available for them if it's virtually. So the question is, how do we do that?
How do we connect these potential members to our clubhouses?
So we needed to let everyone know that we were still open virtually. So first, we reached out to surrounding mental health communities and told them that we were using Zoom, we were doing phone calls, we were doing video chat.
We reached out to inactive members.
We hosted some Facebook Live events to allow people to know that they were still here and have members and friends that might need the High Hopes also know.
We continued to connect with prospective members that demonstrated interest previous to our building closing.
Yeah, so before we closed, we had members that were about to enroll. So instead of just pausing, after we got ourselves together a little bit, we went, okay, now we need to figure out orientation so that they have a community too. Next slide.
Because we're some point and shoot method using our phone cameras, walking through each area of the clubhouse and giving a bit of information about each unit. And typically, we would rely on members and staff working in the various units, whether it be membership, career development, food service, media, etc., to give a more thorough detail of the ins and outs of each unit. But during our time of building closure, colleagues had an opportunity to better familiarize ourselves with units that we may not have as much experience with working in. And while giving the tours, I would feel that it was really important to emphasize that the emptiness of the clubhouse while the point and shoot was happening is very unusual, and I would try to really emphasize how busy and upbeat the normal work order day normally is pre-COVID. A slide that just showcases a bit of show off in a virtual tour we have in front of our building. We've got in the middle here, myself, Randy, talking some of our clubhouse swag, and on we have our cafe and getting ready for the work order day. Next slide.
So in order to do this, we kind of had to figure out if our members were interested / capable of doing this technologically speaking.
In the pre-orientation phase, we would discuss what kind of experience they were interested and able in doing.
Yeah, so we tried a lot of different ways of connecting with people. For some, honestly, video chatting or Zoom was more hassle than it was work. They got overwhelmed with trying to figure out tech and media.
Sometimes we had to play by ear, and we found a way to work was a current member on Zoom, and staff would place the speaker next to the phone and put the orientee on speakerphone.
Yeah, so we had to kind of MacGyver it so that a current member could be connected and the staff in the clubhouse and the new member. So we just used what we had to make everyone feel comfortable and make them feel like they had an opportunity to connect. It wasn't ideal, but ultimately our goal here was just to let this potential member know that we're going to meet you where you're at and we're going to find a way to figure this all out together.
Which worked great for some people.
We then would conduct a lot of orientations or tours verbally, and we'll show you in a minute. We have a PowerPoint to help us keep on track, and it just allowed for cues. It allowed for us to have a conversation about what this new member needed and what they wanted out of their clubhouse experience. Next slide. Perfect. So first, like Capital, we started out with a point and shoot method because that was the first thing we could think of. But we found that we were having a hard time explaining the vibrancy of our clubhouse because the empty clubhouse didn't convey the atmosphere of that clubhouse, you know, the busy chaos that you walk into.
We needed a simple and fast solution to be able to demonstrate the chaotic and structured work order day and the side-by-side work that happens every day in the clubhouse.
Yeah, so we made this now a unit task of the membership services unit. So during our unit meetings or our virtual time, we created a PowerPoint that we were then able to share over Zoom, share our screen so that the members could get a picture of what it looked like.
Which gave our membership unit purpose and a needed task to work on.
And this just allowed for a more structured orientation, and it gave the new member, we found, more space to ask questions. It gave them a visual to see what we were talking about when we were active. Next slide. So while creating this PowerPoint, we had to figure out a way to kind of translate what our orientation experience was in person and how we could make this virtual. So we asked ourselves a lot of questions about what is the ultimate message that needs to be involved in an orientation.
One of the things we needed to include was the 4 guaranteed rights, how important the 4 guaranteed rights are, how they are like the first things you see when you come into the clubhouse, we needed to figure out how we explain the 4 guaranteed rights in a normal orientation and translate the essence of the 4 guaranteed rights virtually.
Yeah, so in our clubhouse, when you first walk in the door, they're posted right on the wall. We have nice plaques. So it's the first thing we talk about. So in our virtual thing, we needed to then do that too. So it was one of our first slides, or it was one of the first things we talked about to still set that foundation that the guaranteed rights are important. Now, voluntary nature, obviously, is one of the biggest essences of Clubhouse. Now, when you walk into our building, it's evident. Everyone is participating. People are excited to be here. They're telling their stories about what they do here. Now, in the virtual experience, we had to rely just on the orientation guide. So we did this a lot of times with a lot of member stories. We used the member tour guides, obviously shared their experience, and we showed the unit boards with pictures of side-by-side signing up for tasks.
And with employment and education, we also use member stories, and we use employment boards for which was translated into the virtual experience.
Yeah, so unit descriptions, obviously the units are a huge part of where the members find their identity. So without going into the clubhouse and seeing all this unit work, we had to kind of find a different way. So again, with our PowerPoint, we used our unit boards, we used photos of the unit work that goes on, and we just talked about what each unit had to offer for them.
And the side-by-side work and the work order day, how we formed the relationships by working side-by-side, talked about with the members' experiences and during the virtual orientation.
And also really important with side-by-side is having members help with it. Knowing that even virtually, we have members side-by-side. Yeah, so obviously, with everything we do in Clubhouse, we want to make sure that existing members are helping with orientation. So now that we had a structure, now that we've done a couple of these, it now became an urgent task of the membership services unit is to help contact new members and participate in orientation.
This allowed us members to feel needed, wanted, and expected to assist new members in joining.
Yeah, and it was expected that our tour guides would help join us on Zoom to help introduce new members and help them figure out kind of what they wanted to get out of Clubhouse. Next slide, please. So obviously, this was not without some bumps in the road. So some of the learning curves we found out. So for some members, we found that they felt less connected. We had some barriers with using Zoom, that a new member didn't want to use their video yet, or they just didn't feel the attachment of talking to a person in live. So we had to kind of, problem solve around that. And obviously, we had to educate members about how to use Zoom or how to use any of these internet services.
However, none of this replaces a in-person orientation, but it allows for members to be involved.
So we're going to talk a little bit about Bianca. So we enrolled Bianca virtually, and she ended up, for our newsletter, kind of writing a little article about her experience. So I wanted to share some of her experience. So she had a referral right as we closed our building, and she felt that if we hadn't been able to orientate her during this time, that she would have lost interest. She couldn't have waited until we opened in June. She felt that having James actually did her orientation, she felt that having James there made it feel very quick that this was voluntary and this was different from her other experiences. And she also felt that when she came in person, she felt more confident to ask questions. She had some education. She wasn't walking into a building that she had never seen before. She'd seen those pictures and she'd had that experience. And yeah, she just ultimately was able to kind of right away hit the ground running. And Chris, you want to talk about Capital's new members experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we had a new member coming in, a young adult named Tanisha. who actually expressed that she felt that it was really cool that she was able to get started on in the virtual realm, and may have even preferred to get started virtually instead of in person due to her inherent experience with technology and some anxiety about coming in person for the first time. It gave her some comfort to get to know myself and the colleagues who assisted with the tour before we were physically open, and therefore made her coming into the clubhouse when we were able to reopen our doors less stressful overall.
Next slide. So after this, obviously, like an in-person orientation, that next step is how do you engage a member you've just enrolled in the clubhouse, and now how do we do it virtually? So our first step after our virtual orientation was to continue to reach out, maybe make a plan with them and see when they might want to connect next.
Invite them to a unit meeting in order to integrate them to a smaller group.
Right, so our house meetings were probably 30 to 40 people sometimes, and that's really overwhelming when you just see all those little squares. So in our unit meetings, you know, we had maybe 8 at a time, so that was a lot easier for them to get to know a smaller group. And also we started to create a new member Zoom time because of large groups or those spaces they don't know. We started a time where new members and orientation guides could come and talk and kind of get to know each other, just like in person when people start at the same time. There's some of that camaraderie.
Virtually, as well as reassuring safety measures upon our physical reopen before we were able to open. Next slide, please. And again, we were just trying to facilitate community outings to assist with new members with getting set up in a hands-on way with Zoom, as well as to demonstrate for our new members what they may have to look forward to as a new member in the process. This served as a safe means to connect with some members who have been resistant to connecting to Zoom and to increase support mediums and increase membership morale in some challenging times.
All right. That concludes our presentation. Back to you, Lisa.
Great, guys. Thanks. Now we would like to hear from Genesis Club, and I'd like to introduce Ruth Osterman and Patrick Cheever from Genesis to talk about onboarding of new staff. Take it away, guys.
Hi, so thank you. Yeah, Pat and I are going to talk now about bringing in new staff during COVID. We actually, throughout this summer, have brought in 3 new staff to Genesis Club. So we'll talk about that process. We had already posted an open position in our business unit in late February, just prior to our shelter-in-place order came in Massachusetts in mid-March. So we had some resumes trickling in as we were having to face, you know, closing the building and moving to remote operations. One of the things that happens that that influences everything that we're going to talk about is as we started to get better resumes. As is true with us in all economic downturns, we got more and better resumes as March and April sort of evolved, which was really helpful in the whole hiring and training process. So in approaching hiring, we hire by committee. As always, we hire with the supervisor and staff and member representatives of the unit of the vacancy that we're going to fill. On the hiring committee, we realized in approaching it that in our typical hiring, we rely a lot on the clubhouse to do the work. So we would bring in anybody whose resume sort of checked all the boxes of the requirements that we're looking for and the skills that we're looking for, and they would get a thorough tour of the club. That tour gives us a lot of information. We get a good sense from the tour guide of the personality and the interpersonal questions and astuteness of the candidate coming through. Lots of members and staff get to meet that person and talk to that person as they're touring through. And then when they enter the interview, we get to hear their reflections on what they saw in the club and what they picked up. We weren't going to get any of that because at this point, our clubhouse building was closed. In our process, after the first interview with the hiring committee, we asked candidates we liked to come in for what we call a second interview, but it's really a morning in our kitchen, experiencing the way that we work at Genesis Club, working side by side with members and staff. And again, we get a lot of information from that second experience to really see, do they dig in, or do they have some energy? Are they talking to both members and staff? Do they kind of enjoy the way that we work? But also, again, a lot of members and staff at the club get to meet candidates and inform our decision about hiring. And then, of course, once we hire a new staff, we rely a lot on the structure of the club and the work units themselves to do a lot of the initial training and really the ongoing training as well. And at the point that we were making hiring decisions, we had not yet opened the building. So we did our first round interviews through Zoom. We're all learning Zoom, right? And none of us were real experienced with Zoom at the time. So the hiring committee first met using Zoom to get ourselves comfortable with that, but also to look at the places in our homes where we were interviewing, the way we present ourselves, give each other some feedback, and to really kind of script some questions in probably a more thorough way than we typically would if we were hiring in the club. The hiring committee empowered me to make phone calls and do some pre-screens, which we typically would not do in our process. So I called all the candidates to get a sense of what they knew about Genesis Club, why they wanted to work in a clubhouse, what their experience had been, giving them salary information, and then scheduling a hiring committee Zoom interview and encouraging them in between time to look at the Genesis Club website and the Clubhouse International website so they could kind of get a bit educated on the way we work, since we were not going to have the tour to do that. The Zoom interviews went really well. I think that upon reflection, we realized a couple of things that we are going to keep with us. Each member of the hiring committee was really calm and thoughtful and attentive during each interview. Whereas when we're hiring in the clubhouse, we try to be calm and thorough and attentive, but the truth is we're running in from a work unit. We've got, a certain amount of time, and we've got to get to the kitchen to serve lunch or get out to a TE. And, you're interviewing in the clubhouse in the middle of a busy clubhouse day. Whereas in these interviews, we were each in our homes. We had some time to prepare. And so I think that we all reflected that the interviews were much more calm and thoughtful. The other thing was we knew we weren't getting all that information from the clubhouse through the tour and other means. And so we all sort of took our responsibility of making these hiring decisions much more to heart, I think, than we do when we're also relying on and in a good way, kind of counting on other staff and members to help us figure out if what we're seeing is really going to be a good club staff or not. So the first round interviews went really well. We talked about what to do about that second round interview, because again, at this point, there were about 5 to 8 staff or members coming into the building every morning at Genesis Club. We weren't open yet to really take care of essential functions. Genesis Club has met through video conferencing at 9 o'clock every single morning as an organizing morning meeting, and we would host that in the building. So we talked about, should we skip the second round interview and just make decisions based on the hiring committee, but together we agreed that some exposure was better than no exposure. So we invited each candidate on separate days to join those 5 to 8 people in the building to sit in a morning meeting, which then allowed people who did come in through video to see faces and smiles, not to get a lot of information, but at least to get that. But our candidates got to see how we talk with each other in a meeting and the kinds of work that we're organizing and the things that were important to us in getting through the day. We then had one of the other staff that was in the building that day tour the person around a very empty building, which gave us some information. That staff person did get to know, who toured, got to know each candidate pretty well. they, were able to see how the candidates responded to how we organize our work on whiteboards and the kinds of work we do in different units, and that gave us a little bit of information. And at that time, we were making care packages to supplement our members' food needs. So we invited each candidate to join a member and staff in the kitchen for about half an hour to do that. So they were with us for about an hour. We still would say we would do that again. It was better to get some information and some exposure from other people in the club than to just take on that ourselves. So we made some hiring decisions. I should say, we had initially posted for an opening in our business unit, and through the process of this first and second round interviewing, we had a staff in our environmental and facilities unit leave. Actually, he had to relocate because of COVID-related issues. And we had already known that we had a staff leaving us in August who was returning to graduate school. So we now wanted to hire 2 staff definitely, but if we could also hire a third with a delayed start in this round, we wouldn't have to go through it again. So we're looking at hiring 3. By the time we made hiring decisions, we were about 2 weeks away from opening our building at a 25% capacity with strict safety protocols, and we made the decision to wait to bring our first new staff in until our building was open. So it felt easier to us to train with somebody in the building than fully remotely. We always say that training Clubhouse staff is challenging. It's a different way of working. It's a frequent topic in comprehensive training and in conferences, so I know it's challenging for all of us. But training Clubhouse staff in a remote operation was truly daunting for us. We put a lot of thought into it. We did decide that new staff would stay in the building, be scheduled for full days in the building for their first 4 or 5 weeks. And then would start to be working from home from there. So Pat Cheever is going to talk to you about how we did some training of our staff.
Thank you, Ruth. I stepped up as part of the hiring committee and a member of one of the units that was going to get the new hire, because members should step up to train the staff. We want good staff. On the new hire's first day, I helped get the new staff used to the unit. We prioritized the new staff understanding the work order day. We want to make sure they understand that through work, contribution, a sense of purpose, and ownership is where the rehabilitation and recovery happens in the clubhouse, rather than work order day being just teaching skills or members having something to do. We also prioritized understanding the importance of our relationship in the clubhouse, which is unique, genuine, strength-based relationships rather than just case management type relationships or a helper or client type relationship. Since much of our work during this pandemic is regularly outreaching members, we want new staff to understand the quality of those contacts. So while in the building, the new staff learn the structure of our day, the work in their units, and can role model staff and members. Understanding the work as a team focus of the work order day. Part of each day is participating in outreach calls with other staff to be introduced to members in the unit that they will eventually be outreaching. And again, the role model, the kinds of conversations during a good outreach call. They are also given clubhouse readings and meet in supervision to formally talk about clubhouse practice. As the first week went on, the new staff, Sam, was able to see the diversity of the members in the unit as he was encouraged to partner with different members. He began to get the idea of how the clubhouse works. In their third week, new staff spend a day in each unit in Genesis Club to learn their operations and begin to see how expansive Clubhouse services are. They are encouraged to look at each unit, how they run their meetings, how they organize their work, as well as model other staff as they engage outreach members. Our new staff started working remotely a day or two a week in their 4th or 5th week with us. We would check in with them. We know that working from home is very different, and many of our staff have struggled to find the right structure to their work day at home and ways of organizing their weeks so that they have work to do. Initially, it is mostly, if not only, outreaching members, but also includes joining Clubhouse meetings and eventually partnering with members to complete the work. Ruth?
So as Pat, thanks, Pat. As Pat's describing that, you may get the sense we're still only open with a 25% capacity. So 75% of our operation is still taking place remotely, and we think that will probably be the case through the rest of this pandemic. So we also want, members who are not coming into the Clubhouse for all the right reasons from other units to know who our new staff are, so that when we reopen fully, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year from now, they know who, they're familiar at least with the faces and a little bit of what they do, and it doesn't feel like a whole new Clubhouse, new staff to them. So we've experimented with some things. We've done Facebook Live interviews with our new staff for those members who follow Facebook and are able to do that. We started mailing out a one-page newsletter to all of our members as an outreach tool, and we featured our new staff on the front page, nice pictures and welcoming introduction when we mailed out that newsletter. Of course, they're in all unit meetings and house meetings. So for those members that are coming into those meetings, and not all our members who are at home are, but for those who are, they're getting familiar with them. And we've opened Zoom outreach rooms in the business unit, particularly where we've hired 2 new staff and said to members, if you want to chat with Cassie or chat with Rachel, come in on Tuesdays from 1 to 2 to meet the new staff. So we're trying a bunch of different ways to really have new staff be known by the whole membership throughout the whole Clubhouse. So our first new staff joined us on June 15th, and Sam came early July, and Cassie came just 3 weeks ago. So we're really early on in this. We've always said that it takes a full year for a Clubhouse staff to really understand, sort of the largeness of their role in the Clubhouse, all the nuances, transitional employment, all of that. So we're really early in on this, and we'll be experimenting and getting feedback and looking for ideas from other Clubhouses too. But so far, it's working really well for Genesis Club. So back to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Ruth and Pat. That was great. So I guess we're ready for questions. If Nikki can.
Not a problem. So for those of you that have a question they would like to ask, please submit your question in the Q&A panel located in the bottom right-hand side of your screen, or by pressing the 3-dot option along the bottom and selecting the Q&A panel. For our first question, it is directed towards High Hopes. You mentioned the 4 guaranteed rights. Can you explain what you mean by that?
So Kaelee, would you take that, please?
Okay, so the 4 guaranteed rights, Jace.
Well, the 4 guaranteed rights is a guaranteed right to a place to come, a guaranteed right to meaningful work, a guaranteed right to meaningful relationships, and a guaranteed right to a place to return.
Yeah, so obviously those are the cornerstones of what Clubhouse means. So those are the 4 guaranteed rights. And with explaining them to an orientee, obviously we talk about them and we go through each right and we just discuss what that means to the member, what that means to the staff, and kind of explain it like that.
Wonderful, thank you. So for our next question, what is the biggest difference between orientating new members virtually than how you used to orientate them?
Chris, would you like to take a stab at that, answering that?
Sure. The biggest difference between like a physical and a virtual orientation, I mean, really, it from my sense, it kind of, well, a couple of sort of different ways to do it, right? Of course, was that we, because here at Capitol, we have sort of like a, you go through all of the different sort of orientation checklists. You hit on all the different sort of points and explaining sort of all the different procedures about sort of, everything that you get here, teaching about, potentially like we need to file a grievance, for example, stuff like that. It was pretty parallel for the most part with the virtual thing. The only thing, of course, was that we didn't have to work out the logistics of how do we get all of the new orientation paperwork signed. So really it was very similar and very parallel, with just going through and explaining things. Obviously not being face-to-face in person was a little bit of a difference, but fortunately in the orientations we were able to do virtually, so it was just a matter of making sure that everything that was explained was understood in that way, and then just getting the paperwork back. It was like a little bit of a logistic curve, but it really wasn't that bad. So it was similar to the physical orientation process. Absolutely.
Thanks, Chris. Next question.
Do you plan on using any of the processes that you have now implemented even after you are fully reopened?
Kaelee and James, and then maybe Ruth, you could talk a little bit about the staff processes you plan on keeping. But Kaelee and James, would you talk about the members orientation?
I think we will use some of this for tours. I think for a couple members who could have come into the building, they've obviously, for the pandemic, elected to do a tour virtually. But I think it's a really good way to reach out to members who can't get in the building, right? So if they don't have to leave their home, but they can see what it looks like, they might have that confidence to come into the clubhouse. Now they have a visual and they have some ideas and talk to people. So that might be really helpful.
And it's less anxiety too.
Yeah, exactly.
Ruth?
So for hiring, and Pat, I wonder if you have any thoughts on this too, but I think, how calm and thoughtful we were in the first round interview. I guess we didn't really realize how rushed and hurried we were in a typical hiring committee interview, fitting that into a Genesis Club day until we really had this experience. So I think all of us on the hiring committee want to keep that, and whether we move that into Zoom interviews because that will make sense, or we find a better way to not rush through those and make more thoughtful decisions. I really liked that we had to think hard as a clubhouse about how to train a new staff. What are those things that are really essential, and how can we teach that without relying so much on the clubhouse to kind of teach it? And then I would do, as a supervisor, a lot of reflective stuff in supervision. What did you think of that? And when you experience that, and they're not necessarily experiencing it now. And so I think we learned, I particularly, but I think the clubhouse learned a lot about being more thoughtful in training to make sure that our new staff really had the tools they need, especially working remotely and in outreach calls with members, so that we weren't kind of sending them out there unprepared. Pat, do you have any thoughts?
I think it's going to be interesting if we have other new staff that come in, getting them trained with so few members, but you still can do it, and there's still that relationship that they're experiencing. So it may take time, but I see us using these skills going forward.
Thanks. Next question.
What has been the biggest obstacle you have found with onboarding new members or staff during this time?
Kaelee and James, would you like to try that for the member perspective? Then we'll jump to Ruth.
Well, I think technology, is some new orientees and people taking tours just don't know just don't have access or just don't know how to use the technology to be able to do it.
Yeah, I definitely think logistics. I think, like James was saying, resources. So a lot of our members don't have internet or a phone, so that was, or phone with minutes on it. So that was definitely a barrier. And just the logistics of setting it all up and coordinating it, whereas we're very much used to in the clubhouse, just get here and we can figure the rest out.
Ruth, how about for staff?
That's a tough one. I think we keep grieving that our new staff can't see Genesis Club being fully vibrant, and so I want to say that's the biggest obstacle. With each thing that they're exposed to, a policy meeting through, video conferencing and unit meetings, it's sort of like, well, you should see it when we're all in the room or we're all in the building. So I think the biggest obstacle is that our new staff can't see fully who we are and how vibrant we are. We see that as an obstacle. I'm not sure that they see that as an obstacle, and I think as we look down the road, we'll see if it really is an obstacle. Upon reflection, maybe they got to learn a little bit better, but we really see it as a loss for them.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment on that?
I would agree with Ruth for new members too. I think maybe it is helpful. They like having a common club to come into, but they're not seeing them. Like I keep saying, when we eat lunch at our separate tables, when this is normal, we eat together and it's like a family. So I definitely think we talk about that a lot too.
Yeah. Next question.
In addition to new members, have you also had inactive members return?
Kaelee can talk about that, I know.
Yeah, absolutely we have. Like we had talked about, we definitely reached out to members that have been inactive, and specifically we reached out to members that were inactive because they were working full-time to see how they were doing and make sure that, like, do they still have a job, what's going on with them. So some members did return to help with employment supports during COVID, and some returned because they knew they could come back.
Chris, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I do think that it's interesting, in the time where I think there's, definitely some increased sort of stress around the whole situation around the pandemic, of course. So that's definitely going to kind of have people a little bit more stressed out. So we did have some people kind of diving back into utilizing Clubhouse Supports. But one thing that I found particularly interesting is that we would have a lot of folks that we would, do everything that we can to do reach out and get them in, pre-COVID. But then now that, like, it wasn't just, through the voluntary nature, right? You can come as often as you want and for as long as you'd like. But since we weren't able to be closed, I found it was interesting that we found a lot of people kind of come out of the woodwork and they were like, well, I want to come into Clubhouse now that they can't or they weren't able to physically. That ramped up their enthusiasm about, attending virtually once we kind of overcame those virtual technical hurdles. So I thought that was pretty interesting, but awesome too that, folks were able to, still be able to access those supports, and that, they didn't forget about us just because we were closed, because we certainly didn't forget about them either.
Great answer.
Can I add, Lisa? I think we didn't intentionally reach out to inactive members, but over the course of from being closed in March till now, we've had about 100 inactive members become active. And, those, especially in March, April, May, were such scary months. None of us understood this pandemic. We were all in our homes, isolated. So I think word spread that we were outreaching every member every day, and people called us for sort of comfort and some conversation. But we also had a lot of employed members reach out to how do I access unemployment? Am I furloughed? What does that mean? So it was interesting to us, I think, that members who were doing really well in employment and we hadn't heard from in a while, when a need came along like this one around sort of unique employment supports, they looked to the Clubhouse for real support around that, and then have stayed active with outreach, because I think we all need some extra outreach these days.
Yeah, we found the same exact thing, Ruth, so thanks for that answer. Do we have another question?
Wonderful. We do. How are you recruiting new members during this time?
Chris, do you want to take first opportunity on this one?
During this time, you know, really, it doesn't feel like it's a whole lot different than, say, February or so. You know, we're still getting sort of the same process of, you know, getting referrals in and reviewing everything. And then, you know, pretty much the day we get the referral, we're calling people, hey, when can you come in? When do you want to come in? What do you want to know about Clubhouse? You know, we'll offer up everything that we can to get people excited about coming in and checking it out. You know, really, we don't have any, you know, we're running still at like, you know, lower capacity than what we normally would be, of course. Just letting people know that, and then we let people know about sort of like that they need to be wearing, you know, adequate face coverings and all that kind of stuff. But aside from that, it's really business as usual as far as things go here at Capitol. You know, we'll just process the referral, you know, schedule the tour and go through the orientation process just as we normally would. So it's, you know, in a lot of ways, very grateful that it's kind of, you know, it's really back to business and it's not super modified. If people, you know, we will let people know that they can request a virtual tour or a virtual orientation as an option, as an alternative, and hopefully we can continue to incorporate that. But really, you know, we'll just try to get it and do it kind of the old-fashioned way, so to speak, for now. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
Kaelee, you want to talk a little bit about what we did with the agencies in the area?
So as we were starting to have some more capacity, we started calling and just contacting all the agencies in the area, just to let them know. All we did was, hey, we're open. We're open virtually. We're still taking in new people, and we'd love to, if you have someone who thinks would be a fit, come on over. Also, honestly, as per usual, our members are the best referral source in the world. You know, they see someone and are like, okay, well, why don't you call the Clubhouse? You know, so I think as per usual, like Chris was saying, we have the same sort of referral sources, but I think our members, our relationships during this time, somehow they grew stronger. And so our members know that we're here and they feel that even more deeply. And I think they're reaching out to their community to say, hey, here's a place for you that they're still helping us, they're still growing too.
Great, thanks. Any more questions, Nikki?
We have one more quick one and then the last one. So this one's directed at High Hopes and Capitol. Would you be willing to share the PowerPoint you use for orientation so that we could use as a template to create our own?
Go ahead, Kaelee.
Yeah, of course.
Chris?
Do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we share everything.
Wonderful. We'll get that set up to share to everyone. And then the last question for today. What is the most important thing you want to impart to staff in their first week?
Ruth and Patrick, this is all you.
So I think I would reiterate, Pat, you can jump in, what Patrick was saying, which is what is the purpose of the work order day? And how are Clubhouse relationships uniquely different? So our nervousness was that without a full Clubhouse, we weren't going to be able, that people would think of us as more a traditional mental health program, that, you know, staff had some helper or case management or, you know, are you okay role with members rather than a collegial partnership. And that's hard to demonstrate without seeing it throughout a busy Clubhouse. And that the work order day is not an exercise in keeping people busy, you know, and so how do you help new staff understand that work is the conduit to building those relationships, to finding strengths in members, to members feeling ownership in their Clubhouse and taking responsibility for their Clubhouse, again, without the role model of that happening everywhere. So to us, we needed them to understand that first and foremost.
Okay. Is that it for questions?
That is all we have for questions today.
Okay, so I really want to thank everybody who spent time with us here today. I want to thank the panel. We were all very nervous about this. You guys rocked it, which I knew you would. We're very, very fortunate to have an international Clubhouse community. And my own personal experience, and I know many of my staff and members teams feel like this, is our relationships during this time grew so much stronger, stronger than they ever have been. And we're very appreciative of all the clubhouses to share our experiences, learn from you through these WANA webinars and just phone calls and Zoom calls and any way we can connect. So we thank you and appreciate everyone in the Clubhouse world for that. The next webinar series in the WANA series is on September 16th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. The topic is digital inclusion. Clubhouse is expanding access to digital communication and opportunity. And it's going to be presented by the Swedish Clubhouse Coalition and the Academy of Glengarry in Florida. And log-on information will be sent out soon. I'd also just personally like to thank the IVCI team and Nikki for being so wonderful with, our technical support, which was much needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, if we have not answered your question, please send an email to wanawebinar@fountainhouse.org. The PowerPoint for today's session will be sent directly to everyone in attendance, and the recording will be made available next week. There will be a survey on screen once the event ends. Please take a moment to fill it out and give us your feedback. Thank you for coming to the webinar. Please be on the lookout for announcements regarding our future webinars. Have a great day.